Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg, and we are approaching the end of the month, which means that it's book haul time. Time to show you the books that I brought into my library in the month of September. I'm really excited about this. I love a book haul. I'm always excited about new books and looking at things that are coming out and sort of considering what other people are bringing into their library or purchasing or reading and thinking about whether or not I want to bring it into my library. So I just get really excited for this type of thing. So we're going to talk about it. And this is sort of a precursor to my book haul revisits, because every year I look back at past book hauls and try to see how many of the books that I bring into my library I have read, how many I still want to read, and how many I have unhauled or want to unhaul. So in a year, we'll get a report card on these. I will have a link to my most recent book haul revisit in the description box down below if you'd like to check that out. I will also have my most recent book haul from last month, so you can check that out as well. Before we begin, I should also note that I will have affiliate links to each of these books in the description box down below. So if you want more information, or if you have your interest sparked in any of these books, you can use those affiliate links and it will take you to bookshop.org, which supports bookstores. And those affiliate links will specifically help me a little bit. So just bear that in mind. Of course, you are also welcome to support your local independent bookstore. I'm wearing a t-shirt from Montana Book Company today because that is my favorite independent bookstore. Or support your library, because libraries are a really good thing to support. So, having noted all of that, let's kind of move into the book haul. It's fairly modest. There are about 7 books that I brought into my library. They're a good mix of upcoming books, new releases, and backlist titles. I love having a mix of frontlist and backlist because I like to sort of move back and forth between them as I read. 2 of these books were sent to me by publishers. We will talk about those when we get there. And I'm just excited to share all about these books with you. The first book I want to talk about is actually a sequel, and I haven't read the first book. This is one of the books that was sent to me by the publisher. It's The Restaurant of Lost Recipes by Hisashi Kashiwai, and it is translated by Jesse Kirkwood. This is a Japanese bestseller, and I had seen the first book, which is the Kamigawa Food Detectives, when it was released, but I didn't really pay attention to it other than the jacket being adorable. And the sequel really lives up to that as well, because this jacket for this sequel is adorable as well. And just to go on a tangent with that for a second, it also feels very nice. Like, obviously you can't feel it, but the texture of the book is really nice, and it looks very cute when you see it in a photo or when you're watching it in this video, but I think you can appreciate a lot of the detail better when you actually hold the book in your hands and look at it, because there's even a little bit of texture within the color itself, like on the cat, on the sushi, on the tuna, on the back, that makes it feel a little bit more like an authentic watercolor type feel. It's just absolutely adorable, and I felt like I had to mention that because I think the fact that the jacket is so adorable is something that will draw people into this book. However, it's even better when you actually have the book in your hand, and again, that is in part because it feels so nice. I don't know if you can hear this. This is not an ASMR video, but it just has a nice texture to it. This is published by Putnam, and as I said, this was sent to me, and I can't wait to read it. I will read the Kamigawa Food Detectives first. I am looking at how I'm going to get a copy of that book. My library does not have it. Actually, my library does have it. It'll probably be through them. So I will try to read that book before I read this one, because they sound really wonderful. And one of the things that really sparks interest in this for me is a blurb on the back. This is actually praise for the Kamigawa Food Detectives, not this book. The Chicago Review of Books said, the cozy literary equivalent of a hearty stew on a cold day. So as I'm filming this, we have moved into fall. And with that, I have started thinking about, cozy fall vibes and things like that, hearty stews. And the weather had gotten cold, although it really warmed back up. So a cozy literary equivalent of a hearty stew on a cold day just sounds lovely for this time of year. So I'm hoping I'll be able to get to this soon if I read the Kamigawa Food Detectives first. So let's talk about what this is about. We all hold lost recipes in our hearts. A very special restaurant in Kyoto helps find them. Tucked away down a Kyoto back street lies the extraordinary Kamigawa Diner, run by Chef Nagare and his daughter, Koichi. The father-daughter duo have reinvented themselves as food detectives, offering a service that goes beyond cooking mouth-watering meals. Through their culinary sleuthing, they revive lost recipes and rekindle forgotten memories. From the Olympic swimmer who misses his estranged father's bento lunchbox to the one-hit wonder pop star who remembers the tempura she ate to celebrate her only successful record, each customer leaves the diner forever changed, though not always in the ways they expect. The Kamigawa Diner doesn't just serve meals, it's a door to the past through the miracle of delicious food. A beloved bestseller in Japan, The Restaurant of Lost Recipes is a tender and healing novel for fans of Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Now, I haven't read Before the Coffee Gets Cold, but I have heard really good things about it. And I am someone who really appreciates food. I'm someone who really appreciates books, obviously. So books about food get me in a very specific place and get me really excited. I also love the idea of food memories being tied into the plot of a book. So I'm really excited to catch up to this book once I read the Kamigawa Food Detectives. And again, this will be released on October 8th. So if you watch this video in the week after this video is published, that will be a pre-order link. And then if you watch this after that, it will have been released and you can go out and grab a copy of it. And look at this beautiful illustration on the title page. I love it. In my book hauls, I like to read a little bit from the opening of the book. First, I want to tell you about the table of contents because the chapters are great. Nori Ben, hamburger steak, Christmas cake, fried rice, ramen, and tendon. And then another beautiful illustration. We begin chapter 1, Nori Ben. Keisuke Kitano jumped off the Keihan Express at Shichijo Station, walked up the stairs and out into the daylight, then stopped to gaze at the swirling waters of the Kamigawa. It had been 5 years since he'd moved from the southern prefecture of Oita to nearby Osaka, and yet this was his first trip to Kyoto. Slung over his shoulder was a navy sports bag printed with the name of his university, its straps digging into his upper arm. Tiny rivers of sweat were running down his muscular neck, leaving damp patches on his white polo shirt. Squinting against the sunlight bouncing off the river, he looked down at the map in his hand and began walking west. That is the opening of The Restaurant of Lost Recipes by Hisashi Kashiwai and translated by Jesse Kirkwood. I cannot wait to read this, but I gotta read the Kamigawa Food Detectives first. Now, the next book is a story collection, linked story collection, called Delinquents and Other Escape Attempts, linked stories by Nick Reese Gardner. Now, before we really talk about that, let me tell you how this book got onto my radar, because this book comes from a very small publisher. It's Madrona Press. And I believe they have only released 2 titles at this point, and Delinquents is the second, I believe. And I believe they are print on demand. However, the book is available on bookshop.org, which is why you will still see a link down there. So it's a very small press. So you might be wondering how this caught my attention given that. Well, it was actually recommended to me. If you follow this channel, you might know that I am a huge fan of Night of the Living Res by Morgan Talty, which is another linked story collection, and his most recent book, Fire Exit. Well, after Fire Exit came out, Morgan Talty actually messaged back and forth with me a little bit and recommended some books. We Burn Daylight by Brett Anthony Johnston, which I have read, and some books by James Welch, and Delinquents by Nick Reese Gardner. So that is how this book ended up on my radar, and I wanted to order a copy of it, so here it is. And there isn't really a description. There's just a tiny little one on the side, but there are blurbs from Morgan Talty, Emily Friedland, who wrote The History of Wolves, and Maxim Leskutov, who is a Montana author. And it just sounds really interesting. So let's talk about this. I will read you the longer blurb from Morgan Talty that's inside this book. But what it says on the back is, when you're trapped in a Rust Belt town, time passes or it doesn't. The people of Westinghouse, Ohio know this better than most. In Delinquents, their personal worlds expand and collapse in on themselves as they battle addictions, build scrap metal rocket ships, and tether themselves to plans that will either get them out of Dodge or blow up in their faces. And the blurb from Morgan Talty on the inside gives you a good idea of the book as well. It says, Nick Reese Gardner's Delinquents and Other Escape Attempts immerses us in Middle America's opioid crisis with raw and riveting stories. Each narrative pulses with the urgent rhythms of lives on the edge, where hope and despair collide in a bang, presenting us with the possibilities of living that one precious life. The characters in these stories are so alive, so real. Their struggles, laid bare with stark honesty, are never exploited to gain emotional connection. This is a testament to Gardner's immense storytelling talent. The stories here are firecrackers. You don't know it going in, but you will once they blow up and crackle and jumpstart your unknowing heart back to feeling alive. Gardner has crafted an enduring and indelible masterpiece, a journey into the souls of our shared community of humanity. Simply put, Delinquents and Other Escape Attempts is a triumph of literary brilliance, and it is one I will never forget. I mean, how do you say no to a recommendation like that? And it's a short book as well. It is about 182 pages without the acknowledgments. So, Shorty September's ending, but, keep this in mind if you want something short before the end of the year as well. I'm really excited to read this. And every book haul that I do is sort of a precursor to a book haul revisit that will be done a year later. I feel pretty certain that I will have read Delinquents and Other Escape Attempts by the time we get to my book haul revisit in 1 year. I'll link my most recent book haul revisit down below because that's my way of holding myself accountable for the books that I bring into my library. And I enjoy doing it. So if you're unfamiliar with the concept, I actually got it from Doris at Aldi Books, and a lot of people, I'll have the most recent one down below just as an example, so you can check it out. So again, this is from Madrona Press, which is a very small publisher. I love a book with a map, and this has a map. The sort of unfortunate thing is that it's like right in the crease. So while it's a really great illustration, the crease kind of does get in the way of it a little bit, but it's just a layout of the town, and it has landmarks noted on it with numbers so you know where you are. Here's how it begins. Delinquents. I asked my characters what they wanted, and they answered. OxyContin, Xanax, blunts, and booze. My goal was to write a book about Middle America during the opioid epidemic. I ran cars full of dope boys with fake MRIs from Ohio to Florida, where we picked up prescriptions of painkillers from the Fort Lauderdale pill mills to snort and shoot and sell back in hillbilly Oz. It was immersive research, the kind people sometimes don't come back from. And that is the opening of Delinquents and Other Escape Attempts, a linked story collection by Nick Reese Gardner, which has a very fun jacket as well. Lots of fun details in there. My dog Teddy has fallen asleep on the floor. You may hear it already. You might not hear it at all, but I wanted to mention it because he is asleep and snoring on the floor next to me. One reason in particular that I am interested in Delinquents is that it kind of reminds me, without having read it, of Knock 'em Stiff by Donald Ray Pollock. This is a book that came out a while ago. I can't remember exactly when. It was published in 2008, and I read it, and I took notes on an index card when I did. That's how much I liked it. You heard a lot about it when it was first published, and I still occasionally hear people reference this book, which just shows that it had some lasting power or staying power in pop culture. But it's gone a little quiet, so let me remind you that this is a pretty good book that was released in 2008, and the description of Delinquents kind of reminds me of this because it's rural, it deals with addiction, and it'll be interesting to read Delinquents and see how close those ties actually go. So that will be interesting to do. Now we get to the second and final book that was sent to me by a publisher. So I was sent The Restaurant of Lost Detectives, and I was also sent Misinterpretation by Lydia Joga. I believe her Instagram account says that her last name is pronounced Joga. I hope that is correct. If I'm wrong, please correct me in the comment section down below. So this is published by Tin House. It was newly released, and Tin House actually reached out to me asking if I wanted a copy of this book, and I said yes. That's not something that happens to me very much, and when it does, it's always a little exciting. Tin House also publishes Morgan Talty. It's a smaller publisher that I enjoy following, and for that reason, I'm always excited when they release something. This has a really fun cover. You can kind of see what's reflecting in the mirror, or maybe that's a painting, I don't know. But anyway, fun book. I think they always publish really interesting things, so this feels very much in line with that. In present-day New York City, An Albanian interpreter reluctantly agrees to work with Alfred, a Kosovar torture survivor, during his therapy sessions. Despite her husband's cautions, she soon becomes entangled in her client's struggles. Alfred's nightmares stir up her own buried memories, and an impulsive attempt to help a Kurdish poet leads to a risky encounter and a reckless plan. As ill-fated decisions stack up, jeopardizing the nameless narrator's marriage and mental health, she takes a spontaneous trip to reunite with her mother in Albania, where her life in the United States is put into stark relief. When she returns to face the consequences of her actions, she must question what is real and what is not. Ruminative and propulsive, Lady Ajoga's debut novel, Misinterpretation, interrogates the darker legacies of family and country and the boundary between compassion and self-preservation. And I think that last part in particular, that it interrogates the darker legacies of family and country and the boundary between compassion and self-preservation, sounds really interesting to me. And the idea that she's an interpreter and the idea of translation being sort of folded into these topics also sounds really interesting to me. And again, I am pretty interested in almost everything Tin House does, so not so surprising that I am looking forward to reading this one as well. Let's jump to the opening of the book. I was 15 minutes late, and his phone number was out of service. Even in late January, Washington Square Park pulsed with the energy of summer. The chess players were fretting over their moves to the sound of Gershwin. The saxophonist's Great Dane was pining for the dog run. It was Alfred who had suggested meeting here, next to the statue of Garibaldi, a name that brought to mind fragmented pieces of Italy glued together. It was an old mnemonic from high school. Garibaldi was responsible for Italy's unification. But Alfred was nowhere to be seen. And let's stop there. That's the opening of Misinterpretation by Lady Ajoga, published by Tin House, out now. And thank you, Tin House, for the copy of the book. Now, just this morning, I was in my local used bookstore and happened upon a paperback copy of Teacher Man by Frank McCourt. Now, you might remember earlier this year, when Joel and I were getting ready to go to Ireland and Scotland on vacation, I was trying to read Irish and Scottish authors, and one of the books that I read was Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. This was his first memoir, and Teacher Man is actually, I believe, the third. There's another book in between them called Tis, and I would do Tis next since I've read Angela's Ashes, and by the way, I loved this book. It is absolutely fantastic. And I definitely recommend the audiobook because Frank McCourt narrates it, and hearing him relate the stories is just delightful. It's really wonderful. So yeah, if you haven't read Angela's Ashes, people always talk about it being sad, but I think particularly if you listen to the audio, it's surprising how humorous it is as well. I wasn't prepared for that when I read it. So I was really delighted by it. So I want to continue with Frank McCourt's life story. So I will do Tis probably on audio, but I wasn't going to pass up the opportunity to get a copy of Teacher Man while they had it in paperback, because I'm a fan of sort of matching sets of books, and these will look nice next to each other on my shelf. So that's fun. But in the meantime, I'll be keeping my eye out for a copy of Tis, but I probably will do both Tis and Teacher Man on audio. I just liked Angela's Ashes enough that I'm pretty sure I'm going to want all three of them in my library, hence diving right into this. So Tis is a follow-up on what happens in Frank McCourt's life when he gets to New York from his childhood in Ireland, and then Teacher Man is about his career as a teacher. Here's what it says. It's published by, Scribner. Here at last in paperback is Frank McCourt's critically acclaimed and best-selling book about how his 30-year teaching career shaped his second act as a writer. Teacher Man is also an urgent tribute to teachers everywhere. In bold and spirited prose featuring his irreverent wit and heartbreaking honesty, McCourt records the trials, triumphs, and surprises of teaching in public high schools. Teacher Man shows McCourt developing his unparalleled ability to tell a great story as 5 days a week, 5 periods per day, he works to gain the attention and respect of unruly, hormonally charged, or indifferent adolescents. For McCourt, storytelling itself is a source of salvation, and in Teacher Man, the journey to redemption and literary fame is an exhilarating adventure. Can't wait. I'm so excited to read both Tis and Teacher Man. Here is how Teacher Man begins. There's a prologue, but I always try to go to the actual first chapter. Part 1. It's a long road to pedagogy, which is kind of funny. Chapter 1. Here they come, and I'm not ready. How could I be? I'm a new teacher and learning on the job. On the first day of my teaching career, I was almost fired for eating the sandwich of a high school boy. On the second day, I was almost fired for mentioning the possibility of friendship with a sheep. Otherwise, there was nothing remarkable about my 30 years in the high school classrooms of New York City. I often doubted if I should be there at all. At the end, I wondered how I lasted that long. That is the beginning of Teacher Man by Frank McCourt. Can't wait. Can't wait. Cannot wait. Now, I was also in my local used bookstore earlier in the month and found a copy of Gentlemen and Players by Joanne Harris. Actually, I got this from the library. This was at my library. And my library sells used books, paperbacks for $1, hardcovers for $2. So I got this for $1. I wasn't going to pass that up at all. One reason this really jumped out to me is that when I worked at Borders, there was a bookseller I worked with named Kathy. She's the best bookseller I have ever known, and also a wonderful human being. And one of the things that made her such a great bookseller was that she had really great taste in books, and she had a really great understanding of what people in her area would like and enjoy. And she frequently mentioned to me that Gentlemen and Players was, if not her favorite book, it was in that top tier of favorite books. And I had always been kind of curious, but I had never gotten around to reading it. The only book of Joanne Harris that I have read is Chocolat. And I don't remember at this point if I read it before I saw the film adaptation or after I saw the film adaptation. The only thing I remember is that when I used to have a copy of that book, it was the movie adaptation or movie tie-in that had the poster of the movie on the cover. And I remember liking that book. But I've always been curious because this is Kathy's favorite book or one of her favorite books. And I had just never read it. So when I saw it at the library in this nice edition, I just grabbed it for $1. So I don't have immediate plans to read it, so if when I do my book haul revisit in a year, I have not read it yet, I will not be surprised. However, I'm hoping that by having it on my shelf, I will eventually get around to reading it, if nothing else in honor of Kathy, who, just great person. For generations, privileged young men have attended St. Oswald's Grammar School for Boys, groomed for success by the likes of Roy Straightley, the eccentric classics teacher who has been a fixture there for more than 30 years. This year, however, the wind of unwelcome change is blowing, and Straightley is finally reluctantly contemplating retirement. As the new term gets underway, a number of incidents befall students and faculty alike, beginning as small annoyances but soon escalating in both number and consequence. St. Oswald's is unraveling, and only Straightley stands in the way of its ruin. But he faces a formidable opponent with a bitter grudge and a master strategy that has been meticulously planned to the final deadly move. Sounds intriguing. This is published by Harper Perennial. And if you've read Joanne Harris, or this book in particular, I would love to hear your thoughts about it, because really, I think so far, Kathy is the only person I know who has read this book, but she spoke very highly of it, which is what made it so urgent that I purchased this copy once it was for sale for $1 at my library. The book begins with a section called Pawn. If there's one thing I've learned in the past 15 years, it's this, that murder is really no big deal. It's just a boundary, meaningless and arbitrary as all others, a line drawn in the dirt. Like the giant no trespassers sign on the drive to St. Oswald's, straddling the air like a sentinel. I was 9 years old at the time of our first encounter, and it loomed over me then with the growling menace of a school bully. No trespassers, no unauthorized entry beyond this point, by order. Another child might have been daunted by the command, but in my case, curiosity overrode the instinct. By whose order? Why this point and not another? And most importantly, what would happen if I crossed that line? That is the opening of Gentlemen and Players. This edition is published by Harper Perennial. Again, if you've read this, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below, because I don't have immediate plans to get to it, but I would be very curious at some point down the line. And honestly, I didn't really know a whole lot about it. That description and the opening sounds pretty intriguing. Like, my interest is very spiked at this moment. So maybe I'll have to get to this sooner rather than later after all, but we'll see. And also at my library, they had a copy of Blonde Roots by Bernardine Evaristo. Now, Bernardine Evaristo was introduced to me by the Booker Prize the year that she was in contention for Girl, Woman, Other, which went on to co-win the Booker Prize for that year with The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. And this had been the book that had jumped out to me the most and the strongest from the long list, so I ordered a copy from the UK. I read it, and I really loved it. And Blonde Roots was something in Bernardine Evaristo's backlist that jumped out at me and sounded really interesting, but I had never seen a copy of it until my library had it, so I was not going to pass it up. I do think that if I'm going to read another Bernardine Evaristo book, I will start with Mr. Loverman, which I have already hauled and which has been living on my shelf and which I really, really, really need to get to. But Blonde Roots sounds really interesting, and I am looking forward to reading more of Bernardine Evaristo's work. This edition is published by Riverhead. Here's what it says on the back. Bernardine Evaristo's dynamic debut novel asks, what if the history of the transatlantic slave trade had been reversed, and Africans had enslaved Europeans? How would that have changed the ways that people justified their inhuman behavior? How would it inform our cultural attitudes and the insidious racism that still linger today? We see this tragicomic world turned upside down through the eyes of Doris, an Englishwoman who was kidnapped as a child from the fields near her home, subsequently enslaved and taken to the New World, as well as to the imperial center of Great Ambosa. Doris movingly recounts experiences of tremendous hardship and the dreams of the people she has left behind, all while journeying toward an escape into freedom. A poignant and dramatic story grounded in provocative ideas, Blonde Roots is a genuinely original, profoundly imaginative novel. I mean, it sounds interesting, right? If you've read this one, let me know what you think of it in the comment section down below, because as I said, I think when I want to dip back into Bernardine Evaristo's writing, I will probably do Mr. Loverman first, but this sounds so interesting. So if you've read it, let me know what you thought of it in the comment section down below. Here is how it begins. It has a map. I love a book with a map. And book one, Oh Lord, Take Me Home. So while my boss Buana and his family are out clinking rum and coke glasses and shaking their wobbly backsides at fancy parties down the road, I've been assigned duties in his office to sort through his ledgers. I used to hope that the celebration of Voodoo Mas would be the one day of the year. Oh, I am really doing badly at this. I used to hope that the celebration of Voodoo Mas would be the one day off in the year for us slaves, but oh no, it's business as usual. Outside the windows, the palm trees that line the avenues are decorated with gold and silver streamers. They are tall, sleek, snooty with the deportment of those who grew up balancing the precious milk of coconuts on their heads, dangling from their glossy green fronds and flickering oil lamps sitting in red-painted cassava gourds. That is the opening of Blonde Roots by Bernardine Evaristo, which sounds fascinating. The final book that I brought into my library in the month of September is not a surprise if you noted my book haul from last month or if you saw my reading wrap-up from last month. This is Justice by Larry Watson. The reason it will not be surprising is that last month I hauled Montana 1948 by Larry Watson and read Montana 1948 by Larry Watson. Again, Shorty September is ending, but this book is 173 pages and it packs a very powerful punch. Shades of Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. I really loved this book a great deal, and I would highly recommend it to you. And I mentioned earlier that I love a matching set. So Milkweed Editions, or Milkweed gave a prize to Larry Watson for Montana 48. So there is a Milkweed Editions version of this book, and there is also a Milkweed Editions version of Justice. Those are the ones you are most likely to find. So I'm really glad that I found the ones that look like this and will match on my shelf. In Montana 1948, you have the story of it's told from the perspective of the son of a family who is 12 years old in Montana 1948, and there's a division between his father and his uncle. And his father is the sheriff, the uncle is the town's doctor, and there are accusations of awful things that the doctor has done, which creates a sort of schism in the family. And it's about the difficulty of doing the right thing, especially when it's unlikely that there will be an easy fix for it, and whether or not people will care, and the difficulty of doing the right thing when the person who's doing wrong is a member of your family. It's a wonderful book. I would highly recommend it to you. So Justice was published after, and this is a collection of linked stories that involve the family from Montana 1948. That is why I spent so much time explaining what that book is about. There are a couple of different stories, but they are all within the Hayden family, or at least tangentially involve the Hayden family. Here's what the back of the book says. This edition, by the way, is published by Washington Square Press. Larry Watson's best-selling novel, Montana 1948, was acclaimed as a work of art, a prize-winning evocation of a time, a place, and a family. Now Watson returns to Montana 1948's vast landscape with a stunning prequel that illuminates the Hayden clan's early years and the circumstances that led to the events of Montana 1948. In Montana, the Hayden name is law. For the Hayden boys, Wesley and Frank, their legacy carries an aura of privilege and power that doesn't stop at the Montana border, even when an ill-fated hunting trip makes them temporary outlaws. But what it means to bear the name is something each generation must discover for itself. From Julian, the hard-bitten and blustery patriarch, to Gail, Sheriff Wesley Hayden's spirited wife and moral compass, Larry Watson gives breath and blood to a remarkable family's struggles and rewards and opens an evocative window on the very heart of the American West. I am so excited. I am really hoping to read this book by the end of the year. I loved Montana 1948, and I'm really looking forward to this. It just sounds so good. So the first story is called Outside the Jurisdiction, and it begins in 1924. I did read the opening pages, and I think it is also the story that gives us the design on the jacket. When Tommy Salter, Lester Hoenig, and the Hayden brothers left Bent Rock, Montana at dawn, only a gentle snow, flakes fat as bits of white cloth, fell from the November sky. But the spaces between those flakes filled in fast, and soon it became impossible to see more than 50 yards down the highway. Where the road dipped or was sheltered from the wind, snow lay so thick on the road that the bottom of the Model T, even with its high clearance, scraped the tops of drifts. Let's stop there. That is Justice by Larry Watson. So looking forward to reading this book. And those are all of the books that I brought into my library in the month of September. Here they are once more. If you have thoughts about any of these books or any of the other books that I have mentioned, if you have recommendations for where I should start or anything like that, let me know in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.